The bell over the diner door jingled as Sarah wiped her hands on her apron. She'd been on her feet for 9 hours, the smell of coffee and fried bacon clinging to her hair. But when the man in the tailored navy suit walked in, the air seemed to change. He didn't just enter, he took over. Conversation stopped, forks paused mid-air. Sarah had seen him before, not in person, but on the news. Richard Callahan. Billionaire real estate mogul. Ruthless. Untouchable. And as his piercing blue eyes scanned the room, they landed on her, and she had no idea that by the end of the night, the entire country would know her name. Richard slid into the corner booth like he owned the place, and maybe he did, in a way. He didn't look at the menu, he just waved Sarah over. Coffee. Black. And bring me something edible. I doubt you've got much to work with here. His voice carried, the kind that expected the whole room to hear and react. Sarah bit the inside of her cheek, forcing a polite smile. Of course, sir. Anything else? He glanced at her name tag. Yeah, Sarah, maybe a new uniform. That one looks like it's been through a war. A couple in the next booth shifted uncomfortably. Sarah walked back to the counter, her hands trembling. She'd dealt with rude customers before, but this wasn't just rudeness, this was sport for him. And she had no idea why she suddenly felt that deep, gnawing urge to fight back. Sarah brought Richard his coffee, setting it down carefully in front of him. Before she could step back, he picked up the cup, took one sip, and let out a laugh loud enough for the entire diner to hear. Burnt. Bitter. Did you scrape this out of an old engine? He said, shaking his head. A few customers exchanged uneasy glances. Sarah's cheeks burned, but she swallowed her pride. I'll get you a fresh one, she said, turning to leave. That's okay, Richard called after her, his voice dripping with mockery. I wouldn't want you to hurt yourself trying. He leaned back in his seat, grinning at his entourage, 2 younger men in designer suits who chuckled on cue. Sarah's hands tightened into fists at her sides. She wanted to snap back, to tell him exactly what she thought, but she couldn't, not here, not with rent due in 2 days. She busied herself at the counter, but she could feel his eyes on her, like a cat toying with a trapped mouse. Then, as she placed his blueberry pie on the table, Richard pulled out his wallet, slid a single crumpled dollar bill toward her, and said, "Here's a tip, for the effort." He winked like it was a gift, not an insult. The diner went silent. Even the cook peeked out from the kitchen window. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, the dollar between her fingers. Inside, something shifted. She thought about her father, about the night he'd come home with a pink slip after 15 years at Callahan Enterprises, the shame in his eyes, the tears her mother thought no one saw. And suddenly, she knew exactly who was sitting in front of her, and what she was going to do. If someone humiliated you in front of a crowd like this, would you walk away quietly or stand your ground and risk everything? Sarah tucked the crumpled dollar into her apron pocket, her expression calm but her mind racing. She grabbed a fresh pot of coffee and returned to his table, pouring it slowly. Hope this one's better, Mr. Callahan, she said evenly. His head tilted. You know who I am. Oh, everyone knows who you are, Sarah replied, her voice light but her words sharp enough to make him pause. Chicago's biggest real estate mogul. Man of the Year. And, she smiled faintly, the reason my father lost his job. Richard's smugness faltered for just a second before the smirk returned. Ah, so this is personal, he said. Guess you'll have to forgive me for doing business. Sarah didn't respond. Instead, she began asking questions that seemed harmless at first, how the downtown project was going, whether the rumors of layoffs were true, and if the city council had finally approved his latest high-rise. But each question carried a weight, a subtext only he could hear. Richard chuckled, answering vaguely, but a flicker of discomfort passed through his eyes. His entourage shifted in their seats. One of them muttered, "We should probably go." Sarah leaned in just slightly, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "You know, the thing about small towns is, people talk. And sometimes, they remember everything." She straightened, giving him the sweetest smile she could muster. From that moment, she could feel the shift in the air. Richard wasn't in control anymore, not entirely. He kept glancing toward the door, toward the other diners who were pretending not to listen but were hanging on every word. And Sarah? She was just getting started. Richard checked his expensive watch for the third time, clearly eager to leave, but Sarah had been waiting for the perfect moment. The diner's atmosphere was thick, customers pretending to eat while stealing glances at the corner booth, the hum of the coffee machine filling the pauses in conversation. She placed the bill on his table, but instead of walking away, she pulled her phone from her apron and, with a single tap, went live on social media. "Good evening, everyone," she said, her voice steady. "This is Sarah from Eddie's Diner, and tonight, I'm serving coffee to the man who cost my father, and hundreds of others, their jobs." Richard froze mid-sip. "Turn that off," he ordered, his voice low but sharp. "Why?" Sarah asked, holding her phone steady so the camera caught his face clearly. "You're proud of what you've built, aren't you? The downtown tower. The luxury condos where the old factory used to be. The same factory my dad worked in for 15 years until you shut it down without warning." The comments started flooding in. "Is that Richard Callahan? I worked at that factory too. About time someone called him out." Richard's entourage shifted uncomfortably, one of them whispering, "This is bad." Sarah pulled a small folder from behind the counter. Inside were photocopies of her father's termination letter, eviction notices from other families, and newspaper clippings about the protests that followed. She laid them on the table, one by one, her hands never shaking. "You remember these, Mr. Callahan?" she asked. Richard looked at the growing audience around them, diners, staff, even a couple of delivery drivers who'd stopped in the doorway. His confident smirk had completely vanished. "This isn't your little boardroom," Sarah said quietly. "This is the real world. And the people you've stepped on. We're not invisible." By the time the live stream hit 10,000 viewers, Richard's phone buzzed relentlessly. His PR team was calling. The story was already slipping out of his control. Q for audience: if you were watching this live, would you be cheering her on, or worried about what might happen next? By now, half the diner had their phones out, recording from different angles. The livestream's viewer count climbed past 20,000, and hashtags with Richard Callahan's name started trending. Richard's jaw tightened as his phone kept buzzing. His PR team was probably scrambling, but there was no way to spin the raw humiliation playing out in real time. Finally, he stood, tossing a few crisp hundreds on the table as if money could erase what just happened. "Enjoy your little moment," he muttered, trying to shoulder past her. Sarah didn't move. She held her phone steady and said, "It's not just my moment, Mr. Callahan. It's every family you left behind when you cashed your checks and walked away." Her voice cracked slightly, but the power in her words was unshakable. Richard glanced at the crowd, people filming, whispering, some openly clapping. For the first time that night, he looked small. He turned and walked out, the doors slamming behind him. Within hours, the clip of Sarah confronting him spread across every major social platform. Morning shows replayed it with bold headlines: "Waitress stands up to Billionaire," and "David vs. Goliath moment goes viral." News anchors praised her courage. Strangers from across the country sent messages of support, and donations poured into a GoFundMe set up by a customer that night. enough to wipe out her mother's medical debt and cover Sarah's dream of going to culinary school. A week later, Richard appeared on television, reading a carefully worded apology, but everyone knew it wasn't from the heart. In contrast, Sarah appeared on the same network, wearing her diner uniform, speaking about fairness, dignity, and respect. Her last words in the interview became the quote replayed everywhere: "The size of your bank account doesn't make you big. The way you treat people does." The camera cut to a slow zoom on her face, tired but proud, as the clip ended. And somewhere in a glass tower downtown, Richard Callahan watched it alone, knowing a waitress with nothing had just beaten him in front of the whole world.